The slap of those words froze the entire office. "Apologize to my son, right now," the CFO barked, certain she would break. Instead, she smiled so calmly it unsettled everyone, whispered, "Okay," and reached for a sealed envelope. 7 minutes later, counsel spoke a single sentence about Section 8 of the compliance agreement, and the room fell into absolute silence. Monday mornings at Ashcroft Financial Group always looked the same. The 24-story headquarters woke before the city did, filling with the scent of fresh coffee, polished marble, and quiet ambition. Employees hurried through the lobby carrying laptops and paper cups, exchanging rehearsed smiles while giant screens flashed market updates no one truly had time to read. From the outside, it looked like the kind of company where everything was perfectly organized. Inside, however, appearances were often the most carefully managed asset of all. Emma Carter knew that better than anyone. As Senior Director of Compliance Operations, she had spent years protecting the company from problems most people never even realized existed. She wasn't loud, she didn't chase recognition, and she never tried to impress the executives. Her job was simple: follow the rules, document every decision, and make sure everyone, from interns to the C-suite, played by the same standards. It wasn't glamorous, but it had earned her something far more valuable than applause: credibility. Before arriving at the office, Emma had dropped her 8-year-old son Noah at school. Their morning ritual never changed. He smiled, hugged her tightly, and said, "You'll have a good day, Mom." She smiled back, promising him she would, even though she had learned long ago that no one could predict what waited behind the glass doors of corporate headquarters. His small photograph, standing beside her computer monitor with a handmade paper rocket in his hands, reminded her every day why she stayed calm when everyone else panicked. She had built her career one careful decision at a time, because she wanted her son to grow up believing integrity was stronger than power. That belief had carried her through audits, investigations, impossible deadlines, and executive disagreements. She had no idea it was about to face its greatest test. At 8:40 a.m., an email appeared in every executive's inbox. Mandatory executive gathering, attendance required, 8:55 a.m. No agenda, no explanation. Within minutes, the atmosphere on the executive floor changed almost imperceptibly. Conversations became shorter, assistants lowered their voices. Managers who usually walked with confidence suddenly glanced toward the conference room, as if trying to read the future through its closed doors. Emma noticed counsel standing outside with several thick legal folders tucked beneath one arm. That detail immediately caught her attention. Counsel rarely attended routine financial meetings, and legal documents never appeared without a reason. Whatever this meeting was about, it wasn't going to be another discussion about quarterly numbers. When Emma entered the boardroom, nearly every executive was already seated. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the room with morning sunlight, reflecting off the polished conference table like a mirror. A few people attempted casual conversation, but the mood felt strangely restrained. Seconds later, the door opened again. CFO Richard Halston walked in with the confidence of someone accustomed to absolute authority, his tailored suit as flawless as his reputation for demanding obedience. Beside him was his son, Tyler, a summer intern whose position everyone understood without anyone needing to explain it. Richard introduced him with visible pride, inviting him to sit among senior leadership as though he already belonged there. Polite smiles circled the table, but several executives exchanged brief glances before returning their attention to their notes. The meeting began with financial updates, yet it quickly became obvious that the presentation mattered less than Tyler's presence. Richard repeatedly invited his son to comment, praising ordinary observations as though they were strategic breakthroughs. Most executives nodded politely, careful not to disagree. Emma remained focused on the documents in front of her, until Tyler leaned toward her with an easy smile and said loudly enough for several people nearby to hear, "Compliance always finds a way to slow everyone down." A few nervous chuckles floated around the table. Emma looked up calmly and answered without the slightest trace of irritation. "Sometimes slowing down for 5 minutes prevents years of expensive consequences." The words weren't sarcastic. They were simply true. The smiles around the room faded almost instantly. Tyler's expression tightened, and for the first time that morning, Richard stopped speaking. The CFO slowly turned his head toward Emma. The room became so quiet that even the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed unusually loud. Several executives lowered their eyes, pretending to review their notes. Others stared at the conference table, already sensing that the meeting had changed direction. Richard rose from his chair without saying a word, placed both hands on the polished wood, and fixed his gaze on Emma. The confidence in his posture suggested he believed the next few seconds would remind everyone exactly who controlled the room. "If you think this meeting is only about a disagreement between an executive and a compliance officer, you're looking at only half the story." Richard Halston let the silence settle over the room before he spoke. Years in the executive suite had taught him that silence could be more intimidating than shouting. Every pair of eyes shifted toward him, then toward Emma, waiting to see who would move first. Finally, he pointed toward Tyler and said in a cold, unmistakable voice, "Apologize to my son, right now." No one laughed. No one questioned the order. Around the table sat vice presidents, directors, and department heads who had negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts without hesitation. Yet not one of them dared interrupt the CFO. The demand wasn't about an apology. It was about authority. Richard wanted the room to remember that his word outweighed everyone else's. Emma looked at Tyler for a brief moment, then back at Richard. Her face remained completely calm. Almost impossibly calm. There was no anger, no embarrassment, no desperate attempt to defend herself. After a few long seconds, she simply nodded once and said, "Okay." The single word caught everyone off guard. Several executives exchanged puzzled glances. Tyler leaned back in his chair with the satisfied smile of someone convinced he had already won. Richard relaxed slightly, believing the confrontation was over before it had truly begun. Neither of them noticed Emma quietly opening her leather portfolio beneath the table. Inside rested a sealed envelope, carefully prepared long before anyone entered the conference room that morning. Without rushing, Emma stood and walked toward the front of the room. Everyone assumed she was about to apologize. Instead, she placed the envelope gently on the conference table and slid it across the polished surface toward counsel. "Would you please read this into the record?" she asked politely. The request sounded ordinary, yet it instantly changed the atmosphere. Counsel looked first at Emma, then at Richard, before carefully opening the envelope. Even the assistants standing near the wall stopped taking notes. The only sound left in the room was the quiet rustle of paper. Counsel unfolded the document and adjusted his glasses. "This is the formal resignation of Emma Carter, effective immediately," he began. A wave of surprise swept through the room. Before anyone could react, he continued reading. "Attached is a notice submitted pursuant to Section 8 of the company's compliance agreement regarding documented executive interference with mandatory compliance procedures and required reporting obligations." The words landed one after another like carefully placed dominoes. Richard's confident expression disappeared. Tyler's smile faded. Several executives instinctively turned toward the CFO instead of Emma. For the first time that morning, she wasn't the center of attention anymore. Richard stepped forward. "What exactly is this supposed to mean?" His voice remained controlled, but the certainty that had filled it only moments earlier had begun to crack. Counsel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he calmly flipped to the attached pages and continued reading exactly as written. The report described repeated attempts to bypass compliance review, documented requests for special treatment involving executive family members, and internal communications preserved according to company policy. Every page referenced dates, emails, meeting records, and approval chains. There were no accusations without evidence, no emotional language, no dramatic conclusions, only facts arranged with the precision Emma had become known for throughout her career. The conference room felt completely different now. Executives who had remained silent minutes earlier suddenly understood why Emma had never argued, never raised her voice, and never tried to defend herself. She hadn't come prepared for a confrontation. She had come prepared for a process. Richard looked toward counsel, expecting the reading to stop, but counsel quietly reached the final page and closed the folder. Then he looked directly at the CFO and spoke the only sentence that mattered. Under Section 8, this filing requires immediate preservation of all related records. No personnel action connected to the reporting employee may continue until the review process is secured. Richard opened his mouth to speak. Counsel raised one hand. Stop everything. The room fell into complete silence. Some people spend years believing power belongs to the loudest person in the room. What happened over the next few minutes would prove how quickly that belief can disappear. Have you ever seen someone stay completely calm under pressure? Share your thoughts below and subscribe if you want to see how this story unfolds. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The words, "Stop everything," hung in the air like a fire alarm no one wanted to acknowledge. Richard Halston remained standing at the head of the table, one hand still resting on the polished wood, but the confidence that had filled the room only moments earlier had vanished. Around him, executives avoided eye contact. Some stared at their laptops, others looked toward the windows, as though the skyline outside might offer an escape from the uncomfortable reality unfolding inside the boardroom. Emma, meanwhile, quietly gathered her notebook and closed her pen with the same steady motion she used at the end of every meeting. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't angry. She simply looked like someone who had finished the last task on a carefully planned checklist. Counsel broke the silence first. Effective immediately, all documents referenced in this filing are subject to preservation under Section 8 of the Compliance Agreement. This includes emails, internal messages, meeting recordings, access logs, and any related communication. The statement was delivered in the same calm tone a pilot might use while announcing a change in altitude, yet its impact was impossible to ignore. Several department heads instinctively reached for their phones before realizing they probably shouldn't touch them at all. The head of IT slowly lowered his hand from his keyboard. Even the executive assistant stopped typing. Everyone understood that the meeting had shifted from corporate theater to legal procedure. Richard finally found his voice. "Emma, if this is your way of making a point, we can discuss it privately." His tone was noticeably different now. The command had disappeared, replaced by something closer to negotiation. Emma looked at him with quiet professionalism. "This stopped being private the moment I was instructed to apologize publicly for doing my job." Her answer contained no bitterness, only simple truth. No one around the table challenged her words because everyone in the room had heard exactly what had happened. Facts, once witnessed by dozens of people, become difficult to rewrite. Tyler shifted uneasily in his chair. Until that morning, he had believed every uncomfortable situation could be solved by his father's position. Now he looked around the conference room and discovered that titles had limits. The executives who had laughed politely at his earlier remark no longer looked at him with approval. They looked at him with caution. For the first time since joining the company, He understood what it felt like when a room quietly withdraws its support without saying a single word. Emma noticed the change but said nothing. She had never wanted to embarrass him. Her responsibility had always been protecting the company's standards, not attacking the people who ignored them. Counsel requested that everyone remain available for follow-up interviews before carefully placing Emma's resignation letter back into its envelope. "Ms. Carter," he said respectfully, "thank you for maintaining complete documentation." She simply nodded. "That's what compliance is supposed to do." Those few words carried more weight than any speech. They reminded everyone that procedures often seem inconvenient until the day they become essential. Outside the conference room, employees continued walking through the hallways, completely unaware that a single meeting had already changed the direction of the executive floor. Emma picked up her bag and glanced once toward the photograph of the city beyond the glass wall. The morning sunlight hadn't changed. Cars still flowed through the streets below. Somewhere across town, Noah was probably sitting in his classroom, focused on math or science, never imagining that his mother's quiet courage had just become the strongest lesson she could ever teach him. She walked to the door without looking back. Behind her, no one tried to stop her. They were all too busy realizing that authority can command silence, but integrity has a way of making the truth speak for itself. News traveled through Ashcroft Financial Group faster than any official memo ever could. By lunchtime, employees on every floor sensed that something unusual had happened on the executive level. Nobody knew the details, but everyone noticed the same signs. Meetings were being canceled. The CFO's afternoon schedule had disappeared from the shared calendar. Members of the legal department were moving from office to office, carrying sealed folders instead of laptops. Even the normally cheerful conversations near the coffee stations had been replaced by quiet speculation. In a company built on information, silence had become the loudest message of the day. Emma, however, was no longer part of the noise. She sat alone in her office, carefully placing personal belongings into a small cardboard box. A framed picture of Noah, a ceramic mug he had painted years earlier with uneven blue stars, a notebook filled with reminders, ideas, and countless pages of neat handwriting. Looking around the room, she realized how little she was actually taking with her. Careers often fill offices with expensive furniture and impressive titles, but the things people value most usually fit inside one small box. She smiled faintly at the thought. Leaving didn't feel like losing. It felt like setting down a weight she had carried for far too long. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. It was Melissa, a project manager who had worked with Emma for nearly 6 years. She hesitated in the doorway before stepping inside. "I just wanted to say thank you." Emma looked surprised. Melissa laughed nervously. "You probably don't remember, but 3 years ago you refused to let my team skip a compliance review before a product launch. We were all frustrated with you." She paused before continuing. "A month later, we discovered a major reporting error that would have cost the company millions. You never told anyone you were right. You just fixed the problem and moved on." Emma smiled. "That's because it wasn't about being right. It was about doing the work properly." Melissa nodded slowly. "I think a lot of people finally understand that today." As Melissa left, another knock followed almost immediately. This time, it was the head of human resources. He closed the door behind him and placed a folder on Emma's desk. "Your resignation has been received," he said quietly. "But I need you to know something." He took a slow breath before continuing. "Several members of the executive committee have already requested an emergency governance meeting this afternoon." Emma raised an eyebrow but didn't ask why. She already understood that events had begun moving without her involvement. Once a formal compliance process starts, it belongs to the organization, not to the person who reported it. That was exactly why she had trusted the process instead of emotion. Before leaving the building, Emma took one final walk through the office. Employees who normally hurried past stopped to greet her. Some offered handshakes, others simply nodded with quiet respect. No one mentioned the morning meeting directly, yet the expressions on their faces said enough. Respect earned through integrity doesn't arrive all at once. It builds quietly over years, then reveals itself in moments when people decide whether to stand beside you or step away. As the elevator doors closed, Emma caught one last glimpse of the executive floor. Hours earlier, she had walked onto it carrying responsibility. Now she left, carrying something much lighter: peace of mind. Outside, the afternoon sun reflected off the glass tower behind her. She checked the time, smiled to herself, and headed toward Noah's school. There were more important conversations waiting for her than anything that could happen inside a boardroom. For the first time in a long while, she felt completely certain she was walking in the right direction. When Emma arrived at Noah's school that afternoon, the noise of the corporate world felt impossibly far away. Children raced across the playground with backpacks bouncing behind them, teachers exchanged quick conversations near the entrance, and parents waited with tired but genuine smiles. None of them knew that only a few miles away, one of the city's largest companies was trying to understand how a routine executive meeting had unraveled in less than 10 minutes. Noah spotted his mother immediately and ran toward her with the same excitement he showed every afternoon. "You're early," he said, wrapping his arms around her. Emma laughed softly. "Looks like I finally finished work on time." It was the simplest sentence she had spoken all day, and somehow the most satisfying. Back at Ashcroft Financial Group, the executive floor remained unusually quiet. The emergency governance meeting had ended without raised voices or dramatic speeches. There hadn't been a need for either. Facts rarely require volume. Counsel had presented the documentation exactly as it had been preserved, along with witness accounts from everyone present in the boardroom. The discussion no longer centered on Emma's resignation. It centered on whether company policies had been respected by those responsible for enforcing them. Directors who had remained silent during the morning confrontation now understood that silence also becomes part of the record. One by one, they answered questions carefully, aware that every statement carried weight. Richard Halston sat through the meeting without the confidence that usually defined him. For years, he had believed leadership meant never appearing uncertain. Now he realized that authority built on position alone could disappear the moment accountability entered the room. No one argued with him. No one accused him directly. The process Emma had trusted did exactly what it was designed to do. It examined actions instead of emotions. That was the quiet strength of compliance. It didn't seek revenge. It simply insisted that the same rules apply to everyone, regardless of title or office size. Several days later, employees received a brief internal announcement. It contained no dramatic language, no public criticism, and no names beyond those necessary for organizational updates. The message confirmed that governance procedures had been initiated, interim leadership responsibilities had been reassigned, and the company would conduct an independent review of its compliance practices. More importantly, it announced expanded protections for employees raising concerns in good faith and mandatory leadership training on ethical decision-making. To many people, it looked like an ordinary corporate memo. To those who had witnessed the meeting, it represented something much larger. The company hadn't been changed by anger. It had been changed by one employee who refused to abandon principle under pressure. That evening, Emma and Noah sat together on a park bench, watching paper boats drift across a small pond. Noah looked up and asked, "Did you have a good day?" She smiled, remembering his question from that morning. "I think I had the right day," she answered. He didn't fully understand what she meant, but he smiled anyway. Children often recognize peace before they understand its cause. Emma looked across the water as the evening sun turned the surface to gold. She had lost a position, an office, and a prestigious title. Yet she had kept something infinitely more valuable: the ability to look her son in the eyes and know she had never compromised the values she hoped he would one day carry himself. Sometimes the loudest person in the room appears to win, until the truth quietly stands up. Power can demand an apology, but integrity never has to ask permission to be heard. And in the end, that was the lesson everyone at Ashcroft Financial Group would remember, long after the boardroom had fallen silent.